The rise of elevated horror. Fear through emotion, not monsters. Darkness doesn't always come with monsters. Sometimes it lives in grief, guilt, and the quiet spaces between people. For decades, horror films were all about what we could see: blood, blades, demons, and the things that go bump in the night. But lately, horror has shifted. It's no longer just about what hides under the bed. It's about what hides inside us. This new wave of horror, some call it elevated horror, has redefined fear. It's horror that doesn't scream at you. It whispers. It sits with you long after the credits roll. It's slow, psychological, and deeply unsettling because it forces you to face emotions you've been avoiding. Now, some people love it, others hate it, but no one can deny it's changed the genre forever. But what exactly is elevated horror? It's not just a fancy label for art house thrillers. It's horror that lives in the quiet moments, in the grief, in the silence between heartbeats. It's the dread that builds slowly, like something crawling toward you from the edge of your mind. These movies focus on emotion and meaning as much as on terror. They take themes like trauma, identity, guilt, and social injustice and twist them into nightmares. Think of Hereditary. It's not just about demons, it's about a family unraveling under the weight of loss and secrets. Or The Witch, where religious fear and isolation turn a family against their own daughter. And Get Out, Jordan Peele's masterpiece that turns racism into a chilling psychological trap. These films aren't about what jumps out at you. They're about what lingers when everything goes quiet. The funny thing is, the idea of elevated horror isn't new. The seeds were planted decades ago. Rosemary's Baby in the 1960s, The Exorcist in the 1970s. Those films terrified audiences, not just with supernatural forces, but with real human horror, paranoia, faith, motherhood, corruption. They showed that horror could be elegant, meaningful, and terrifying all at once. But back then, people didn't call it elevated. They just called it great filmmaking. So why did this new label appear? Because around the 2000s, a wave of directors came along who started treating horror not as cheap thrills, but as emotional storytelling. Studios like A24 gave them the freedom to make strange, slow, beautiful nightmares. Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, Jordan Peele, each of them brought something different, but all of them shared one idea: that the scariest thing isn't what's outside, it's what's inside us. The Babadook showed us that grief can be a monster that refuses to die. It Follows made intimacy itself feel like a curse that stalks you everywhere. Midsommar turned bright sunshine and smiling faces into pure emotional horror. And Get Out took real social anxiety, the fear of being seen but not understood, and turned it into something truly horrifying. These films didn't scream boo. They looked you in the eyes and made you feel uncomfortable. They made you think about the things you try not to think about. And that's why they divide fans. Some people feel like elevated horror looks down on the rest of the genre. They see it as pretentious, too slow, too artistic, as if the filmmakers are saying they're above traditional horror. But others see it as evolution, not arrogance. They believe it's just another step in horror's long transformation, a new skin for an old fear. Because horror has always been evolving. In the 1950s, it reflected our fear of nuclear war and science gone wrong. In the 1970s, it was about society breaking down and evil hiding behind closed doors. The 1980s turned fear into spectacle, with slashers and gore. And now, in the 2020s, horror has turned inward, becoming psychological, emotional, introspective. We've stopped running from monsters and started facing the darkness inside our own minds. The success of elevated horror also changed how people outside the horror community see the genre. For decades, critics dismissed horror as cheap entertainment, but when Get Out won an Oscar, when Hereditary earned rave reviews, when audiences left Midsommar in stunned silence, it became impossible to ignore. Suddenly, horror wasn't just a guilty pleasure, it was a cinema worth talking about. And yet, there's a cost to that praise, because when critics call something elevated horror, they're often implying that the rest of horror isn't worthy, that slashers, creature features, and campy supernatural flicks are somehow less intelligent. But the truth is, horror has always been smart. Night of the Living Dead tackled racism in 1968. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre captured post-Vietnam America's paranoia. Scream turned horror tropes into social commentary long before the term elevated existed. So maybe the label doesn't elevate anything. It just gives mainstream audiences permission to take horror seriously again. Still, there's no denying that elevated horror has brought new kinds of viewers to the genre. People who once avoided horror now find themselves drawn in by its emotional storytelling. The fear feels more grounded, more human. It's not about escaping monsters, but understanding pain. You don't just watch someone die, you watch someone break, and that can be more disturbing than any ghost. Take Hereditary again. The most horrifying moments aren't supernatural, they're emotional. A mother screaming in grief, a son trembling with guilt, a family that feels cursed long before any ritual begins. You leave the theater feeling like something inside you cracked open. Or look at The Witch. The fear doesn't come from jump scares. It comes from isolation, repression, and faith collapsing into madness. Every frame feels cold. You can almost feel the despair of being trapped in a world where even your family can't save you. And then Get Out, brilliantly turning the discomfort of racial tension into a literal nightmare. It's the kind of film that makes you laugh 1 second, gasp the next, and leave the theater thinking about it for days. That's what elevated horror does best. It doesn't end when the credits roll. It lingers, like a whisper in the back of your mind. But for all its artistry, elevated horror still faces criticism from fans who miss the fun of old-school scares. They want the chaos, the blood, the campy thrill. And honestly, they're right to want that too. Horror was built on those things. The genre has always had room for both the profound and the ridiculous, for deep metaphors and screaming teenagers. One doesn't erase the other. If anything, they feed each other. Maybe elevated horror is just part of the genre's natural cycle, like how fashion trends come back around, or how every generation rediscovers fear in its own way. The old monsters never really die. They just change form. Today's ghosts are grief and trauma, but tomorrow, who knows? Maybe we'll go back to masked killers and haunted houses. Horror always finds a way to evolve with us, and that's what makes it beautiful. Elevated horror didn't fix the genre, it reminded us what horror has always been about. Not just blood or monsters, but emotion. The best horror makes you feel something, whether it's disgust, fear, sadness, or reflection. It gets under your skin. And once it's there, it doesn't leave. Streaming platforms have only fueled this fire. Netflix, Shudder, and others have given space to smaller horror projects that might never have reached theaters. Movies like His House, The Platform, and Relic prove that you don't need a big budget to tell a powerful, terrifying story. They use emotion, atmosphere, and character to create fear that feels personal. Even international filmmakers are joining the movement. South Korea's Train to Busan, France's Raw, and Mexico's Tigers Are Not Afraid all blur the line between heartbreak and horror. They remind us that fear is universal. It just wears different faces depending on where you live. And that's the real magic of elevated horror. It's not about being better than other horror movies. It's about revealing how flexible fear really is, how it can adapt, evolve, and still hit us right where it hurts the most. Whether it's grief, guilt, love, or loneliness, these stories turn human emotion into a monster. So, why does it divide fans? Because horror means different things to different people. For some, it's about fun and adrenaline. For others, it's about catharsis and reflection. Elevated horror doesn't replace the classics. It just opens another door in the haunted house. And maybe that's what horror has always been. A house with endless rooms, each one filled with a different kind of fear. The truth is, we need both. We need the slow, creeping dread of The Witch and the chaotic fun of Friday the 13th. We need the psychological unraveling of Midsommar and the popcorn-fueled chaos of The Conjuring. They all belong under the same blood-stained roof. So, as horror keeps evolving, maybe it's time to stop arguing about labels. Whether it's elevated or mainstream, good horror is the kind that makes you feel something real. That's what stays with you when the lights come back on, because when you think about it, horror has never been about monsters. It's been about us, about the things we bury, the emotions we refuse to face, the pain we try to silence. Elevated horror just holds up the mirror a little closer. So next time someone says horror is just cheap thrills, show them Hereditary. Show them Get Out. Show them The Witch. And then remind them that fear doesn't need to scream to be terrifying. Sometimes, the quietest horror is the one that cuts the deepest. Horror has always been about evolution, about finding new ways to confront our demons. Elevated horror is just the latest reflection of that truth. It's not perfect, but it's powerful. It's not loud, but it's unforgettable. And maybe that's what makes it truly scary. So as you turn off the lights tonight, ask yourself, what kind of horror stays with you longer? The monster that jumps out of the dark, or the one that whispers in your mind long after the movie ends? If you've made it this far, you probably already know the answer. Which kind of horror gets under your skin more? The classic blood-soaked scares, or the slow psychological dread of elevated horror? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe before something else decides to watch you back.